Everyone, welcome back to FPL Fran. Today's video is going to be a Gameweek 4 free hit draft video. I've already created a wildcard video today. That looks a little bit more medium to long term because, of course, I'm planning with deliberately, let's say, maybe a chip strategy in mind, right? Either it's the sort of wildcard 4, bench boost 5, free hit 6 strategy, or a chip agnostic strategy, something that I'm still deliberating with. But a lot of the picks, a lot of the selections there, a lot of the kind of deliberations are just around medium to long-term things. But Gameweek 4 free hit, I think the considerations for a lot of managers really are, does the free hit make sense for my team? And obviously you might have already locked in already based on the news that you have for your team, but I think there is a lot of prompting of the free hit due to the injuries. One thing that I would just mention and consider is, you know, if you own someone like Sar, for example, who still seems to be out for Gameweek 4, there's a huge consideration of whether he even makes sense for your team going forwards, right? He could play limited minutes in Gameweek 5, and then he's got Liverpool in Gameweek 6. And so if you use a free hit, it's not exactly the best incongruent with that. As far as, let's say, Cunha, for example, it seems like he's out for multiple weeks. So if you actually have these players who could still be out for multiple weeks, or even someone like, let's say, Palmer or Saka, right? Like, these are the types of players where I'd say Palmer's probably the reasonable pick, where he's close to coming back soon. Wasn't pictured in training today, but could play very well for Game Week 4, and could prompt you to use the free hit. But there are some considerations of more medium to long-term injuries where I probably wouldn't. Either way, though, I think we're looking at specifically one game week and a solution that fits your team based on the strategy that you've gone for, or how your strategy is alternated because of, you know, real life events. If you have gone for a Haaland draft, for example, this is a pretty standard week to go for a free hit. I can understand simply just because the Burnley away aspect. And then also I think it's a good opportunity to jump into maybe a lot of players who have really good fixtures here on this specific game that you might not own going forwards. Like, and I think that can still be the case of some Crystal Palace players, like for example, Mateta, who not everyone is moving into. In the midfield position, for example, it could even be just shopping for a Newcastle player and then not owning them again, right? So there's a lot of upside with some singular fixtures as well. To support that decision making, I think the easiest way as well is to have a look at Fantasy Football Hub. Have a look in the link in the description below. There's a lot of advanced tools. We'll also share some of the odds from this week that come directly from Hub and their model. But crucially, I think at this week, you can look at things like the AI team, like the best AI free hit team, and have a gauge of, you know, what is creating that sort of 100% draft, and seeing what the differences are in terms of how you'd like to approach your team. Also, just having a look at little things like whether free hit 4 works for your team, right? Plugging it into the AI team rating tool, seeing whether the free hit 4 actually works for your team better than, let's say, a free hit 6, or even delaying the free hit. That sort of possibility is still absolutely there for people who are maybe gambling for a blank game week to happen, maybe actually going for Haaland and then actually looking to free hit on 14, almost the inverse of the free hit 6 concept. So have a look at things like that, as I said, at Fantasy Football Hub, and check it out. So this week, we're going to very much look at Game Week 4. We're just purely targeting this. So I think it makes sense to look at free hit 4 from a fixtures point of view, right? And just kind of split it between attack and defense. Clean sheet odds are very close to the top end. So it's Arsenal, it's Liverpool, it's Newcastle, it's Crystal Palace. City's actually very close as well. I probably would dodge City, if I'm quite honest, in terms of defense. I just don't think, first of all, they're not really solid in terms of defense. There's a lot of injuries and a lot of chop and changing. Like, for example, Ruben Diaz getting substituted last game. Not even substituted, sorry, but not even starting. Kusanov started that game. Arsenal, for example, that's probably where most of the value lies. But then it's a week where they cost a lot of money. And then in comparison, you actually have, let's say, a Newcastle defense or a Crystal Palace defense that are much, much cheaper. And I think there's a lot of value to be had there. So I would say, from a game like this, when I'm considering a free hit, I would probably consider actually not shopping for too much Arsenal defense on this free hit. I think you can definitely get away with some of the Crystal Palace players, and you can also get away with some of the Newcastle players, because I think there's also a little bit of a shift in terms of expectation of some of the Newcastle players can actually give you defensive contributions, which obviously the Arsenal players can't do, or won't often do, right? Just based on the expectations that we've had. We've discussed about team defensive contributions, things like that. I'll also share a very quick graphic here, which is also created with the Opta Stats tool from Fantasy Football Hub. All this data comes from the advanced stats from the Pro tool, and you can kind of see the team defensive contributions. No surprise to see Arsenal pretty low on this list, right? So going to that point, I think it actually makes sense to shop with the defense that has, let's say, Raya and Dubravka. I would then go Munoz, Lacroix, Burn, and Virgil. So it's not the most well-rounded team, but I think you can bypass a Gabriel on a week like this and simply shop for Raya for that sort of maximum clean sheet potential. But then for Burn, I'm talking about things like defensive contributions, which he's had already. With Lacroix and Munoz, I think there's the attacking threat there. And equally also, just the defensive contributions, right? Like Lacroix is a bit of an interesting pick in the sense that for this week, I think he's far and away the best Def Conner who has a really good game when it comes to clean sheets, right? No one is close when it comes to, let's say, Senesi, Tarkovsky, those types of players who are also very high up in the threshold. And Virgil, I think, matches up really well with the Arsenal defender because he also has that sort of Def Con potential too. So that's the defense that I'll be working with. And that's also a 4-back, right? So dramatically, I think a lot of people have issues with playing the 4-back, but I think early doors within the season, we can already see how immense the potential is. Like, you don't even need to really step into bonus to even get, let's say, into the territory of being able to get into that 8 points, which is almost like a striker scoring a goal, right? So that's very, very impressive. I also think you have now a lot of value just in some of the auto subs as well. So Reynoldo, who actually has an okay game on paper. I mean, out of all the promoted teams, I'd say this is probably still the best game to shop. Reynoldo's actually proven to be a really good Def Conner so far. So I think that he's a really, really easy sort of stopgap to round out the team. And unfortunately, I think one of the things with the draft, and you can obviously bypass this by going Raya to Pope, for example, but the only thing I'd say is probably the auto sub within the free hit isn't the best, but you could go and shop for a 4.5, for example, and you can put Anderson there, and that would work out too. So I think it's a case of, do you want to back Arsenal defense and almost hedge against everyone else with the one Arsenal defender, or actually do you want to back Newcastle defense instead and go double Newcastle defense, for example, which would be a little bit more enticing, right? Why is that interesting? First of all, I think if you're backing, let's say, one specific team on a free hit, you are anyways asking for a result to go your way, right? So stacking on multiple players within one specific week, I think is totally fine conceptually. I know a lot of people don't like stacking one defense, but this isn't necessarily a game week 2 where I think there's a lot of fullbacks who have crazy attacking potential, unless you want to shop for an Arsenal fullback. And I think that there's always the possibility that you can get extreme value from the quality of player from, let's say, Calafiori, right? But it's also possibly 65 minutes of Calafiori, or I don't know, maybe let's say 75 minutes of Timber. So something to consider. I'd probably prefer someone who can also give you a mixture of DEFCON and clean sheets, given that you're not always expecting attacking returns from defenders. In fact, it's probably less of a probability compared to defensive contributions, generally speaking, and of course clean sheets, where there's so many good clean sheet odds on offer this week. In the midfield, though, I would punt Barnes, and ironically, I think it's also partly to do with him being benched last week, but then this is also being a home match. I'm not quite sure why there was such a defensive approach in terms of the setup, I think, within the previous match, but I would like to think that with Gordon once again being suspended for this match, that Barnes has more than enough scope to play 90 minutes. I think it also helps that the previous match just didn't go very well for Newcastle when it comes to actually building effective chances, and this is a home game too, so I think this is still a really good punt and angle to go for Barnes, someone who's always had historically great underlying stats, right? And you know, to support this from an attacking point of view, we also have some of the market, some of the hub odds as well, the model odds for attacking goals for this week. So City top, which is a bit surprising, but I think partly this could be due to United still actually haven't looked very good, right? They still conceded a lot of chances versus Burnley, so I'm actually not too surprised at City's top. But Liverpool, maybe the away aspect takes away from the Burnley away piece, but Newcastle's high up there as well, Arsenal up there, so is Crystal Palace, and these are probably the fixtures that I'd target from Leeds and Brighton, or even Bournemouth, not too far away, Chelsea as well. So that's kind of what I'd be thinking of when it comes to either you pick players who are teams more situated around that middle pack for the goals this week that have really key players, like, for example, João Pedro, Semenyo, who have lower projected goals on this list, but probably are better than some of the players. But I think also because you're shopping for some of the more expensive premiums this week, which would include Salah and inevitably someone who scored 5 goals versus Moldova earlier on this week, I'd say Barnes is probably a pretty good in between, right? Where I still think the minutes are going to be really good. It's a home match. It is Wolves, who've actually proven to be a really poor defense to start the season, especially with the open play numbers. So I would definitely take my chance with Barnes, someone who, as I said, has really good underlying stats. I would go Salah and Gakpo, and I think that's pretty definite. I think there's opportunities where you can actually go triple Liverpool attack with, let's say, Salah, Gakpo, and Wirtz. But it's a case of, I think, once you almost want to lock in Haaland for the week, it's quite impossible to have a nice looking or well-rounded setup that has Salah, Gakpo, Wirtz, and Haaland. So I think the sacrifice here is not going triple Liverpool attack and being comfortable with Virgil, who simply is also still a great pick, right? And at the end of the day is an aerial threat. So yeah, I would go Salah and Gakpo. Gakpo's cheaper. I think Gakpo offers the same value as Wirtz as long as they play the same amount of minutes. And in a situation where Isak is not match fit, there was some sort of reporting around how if Newcastle were to find that Isak would be to reintegrate into the team, that he probably would have been playing more minutes around October. I do doubt that that's how long it's going to take for Isak to start a game for Liverpool, but I definitely don't see him starting this game. So sure, that makes Ekitike a little bit more interesting, but I think on the flip side, if I was to think where the substitute's going to, sit for this Liverpool team, I still think it would land towards Ekitike, and maybe that's on a good day, for example, 25 to 30 minutes of Isak, just kind of like how he did for the international break, where he played, I think, 0 minutes for the first game, and then had a 20-minute cameo in the second game, especially in a game where Sweden needed to score. So I would go Gakpo. I would also go Reinders in this week, and I think part of this is prompted by a lot of the injuries that City have. I think this should allow for Reinders to play in an attacking 10 type role, similar to the Wolves game, right? So you're not expecting, I think, absolutely nuclear offensive contribution from him per se, but he should have still really good scope to get goals, specifically within this matchup where they're at home as well. And as I said, United still look like very much a team to target for. And then the kind of mid auto sub is going to be Josh King, and there's nothing really too much to say. I think you if you have a little bit more scope to have a better auto sub, I think Dewsbury Hall is there. And once again, it goes back to something as niche as just going Raya to Pope, and maybe just shopping for a Dewsbury Hall in this situation. Or once again, I think Reynaldo might be a better auto sub anyways, or rather, sorry, Anderson might be a better auto sub anyway. So you can just have the one, and then Josh King will definitely just be fit for purpose as a second auto sub. And that's going to be the 4-4. As far as the two, I would definitely just go with Haaland and Mateta. Part of this is when I think about all the fixtures that have the most nailed players that are also on penalties, Mateta probably fits that bill for Crystal Palace. I mean, when you compare it to Newcastle, for example, I still think you're going to see slightly managed minutes between Wiese and Woltemade, most likely. One, because Woltemade's pretty green. He did have reasonably decent minutes for Germany, but Wiese as well, I think, just hasn't had a huge preseason, but did, of course, play over the international break as well for DR Congo. So I think it's nice on paper to think about, let's say, a Wiese punt or a Woltemade punt, but I still think Mateta just is the all-rounder, where he's also rested at home for the international break. He's most likely going to drop a 90-minute game, which you can definitely enjoy more from than some of the other picks that are a bit more contextual that might have reduced minutes, right? And this goes back to Ekitike, who still, at the end of the day, doesn't have penalties. And within the Newcastle striker situation, you're not exactly sure how the minutes are going to play out this week, I think specifically of the strikers. So the alternative, of course, is going Gyökeres, but I think Gyökeres goes back to that point of what Wirtz kind of does towards a draft like this, where once you spend the money like that, I guess you'd have to drop Haaland from the team. And ultimately, I just think Haaland is such a good punt for this game week. The ownership is still extremely low. He's still the best or the second best player on this week very, very easily. And so it's just an easy opportunity to just move into, let's say, Salah as a captaincy. Interesting, of course, with City projected with higher goals, I probably would still back Salah just because it's Burnley. And as I kind of said, just even looking at Wolves' early doors, they and Burnley have kind of set the mark for what a bad defense looks like so far. And I'd probably trust in that, even though United were pretty appalling as well versus Burnley, if I'm being completely honest. Like I don't think from a defensive point of view, any team came out looking good in that game. But United still, I think, racked up something like upwards of 3 XG on that match in open play numbers, right? Discounting the penalty. So that's not a good sign. And I definitely take the chances there with Burnley away with Salah. But equally, I mean, I can also see someone wanting to captain Haaland. Do I think I would lock that in? Personally, no. I just think if you're going to free hit, you don't really want to feel bad about maybe the predominant ownership within the game and the effective ownership in the game being with Salah, and then kind of cheering on one less player on the free hit. You almost want to maximize the value. And I think the value maximization comes from the rest of the picks, not necessarily flipping captaincies between Salah and Haaland. But equally, I think both are going to do good, and you think Haaland's just going to do better anyways, then there's your argument for going Salah. So that's it in terms of the free hit draft. I think in terms of other concepts, as I said, going back to the free hit, there's a couple of things that you can think about. So, of course, there's not enough Arsenal defense here, but I think affording Arsenal defense almost asks for not going Haaland, potentially. Or maybe it's actually you prompt that by going for a 5-back. I don't think that that's a great utilization of the funds though, because I do think that there's a lot of good Liverpool minutes on offer and Wirtz is included. So as I said, if you're willing to bin off someone like Haaland, you can therefore then move someone like Reinders to a Gakpo and Wirtz combination, and then actually just go Haaland to Gyökeres and probably actually enjoy what is a really good 4-4-2 and maybe even upgrade Dan Burn slightly, right? This is then scope to go maybe double Arsenal defense as well. So Burn can suddenly be Gabriel, and then you might actually have a stronger draft on the net side if you're willing to go without Haaland. So that's something to consider, because actually when I look at some of the goal scoring odds for this week, specifically from Solio's projections, which are just based on the market odds from SpreadX, Gyökeres is very close towards Haaland, right? So you're losing 5%, I guess, of projected goals, and the cost, I suppose, is, you know, that versus what is the net benefit of having Wirtz, the net benefit as well of having other players like a Gabriel this week, who still has better clean sheet odds anyways, and of course slightly more goal threat than Burn, if you want to decide that. So I think those are the kind of considerations. That's effectively an alternative free hit concept. But otherwise, I wish you guys the best of luck on your free hit. Take care. Goodbye. I'll see you guys soon.